Kantian, when we think of adding things to our motivational set, we have a thought. Or when we look at something already there, and we ask, should it be there or not? Here's what we do. We say, when I will it, when I operate according to it, am I simultaneously willing that it be in every other agent's motivational self who's in similar circumstances? So when I decide to, I thought you dropped the class. No, I just.
I was going to see exactly.
Okay, I'm glad to see you were still here. I noticed that you were missing for some reason. So motivational self. When I will, so let me give an example, right? I think, you know, I want to get out of, I want to be excused for my late paper. And really, I just didn't bother to do it. But if I say that, I'd probably irritate the professor. So I'm going to lie. I'm going to tell him that my grandmother died, or my dog was run over, or I had the flu, or one of those. And then you think, okay, would I will that everyone else who was in this predicament also do that, right? So that's the test. And Kant thinks that if you apply it to the lying case, you won't lie. You'll see that it fails. Now, why does that test apply? So let me just remind you of where the test comes from. You might think, what a weird test. But in fact, it's just this. Kant thinks that a reason is a reason for every rational agent. A reason is just a factor, a consideration that applies to every rational agent. Right? All you have to do is just think about it like with logic or mathematics or physics or any of the other things that are in theoretical reason. A reason there is a reason for everyone. If there's a reason for you to conclude 4 when you add 2 plus 2, it's not just for you. Right? To be a reason, it has to be a reason for everyone, for every rational agent. And so, right, what do you say? So let's just put that up. To be a reason, that is, a motivational factor in this case, R must be a reason. Every rational agent. So when I look in here and I find this motive, M1, and I think, when I act on M1, notice that it goes like this. Not, would I be happy, would I like it, it's this. When I operate according to M1, I simultaneously am putting that in every other agent's motivational set. There's a kind of double will, right? In just the way that when I think, look, somebody says to me, I've got $8 in the bank, I owe 5, how much will I have left? That's kind of a no-brainer, right? Say, well, you'll have $2 left. And notice that I'm not thinking, you'll have $2 left. I, however, would have 3, or Mary would have 8, or John would have 9. I'm actually thinking anyone would have 2, which is why you have 2. Not, you have 2, but I don't know about anyone else. It goes from everyone to you, not from you, right? So when you consider something a reason, you're thereby, as it were, saying, making it through that, it's a reason for everyone. And so Kant says, right, now think about that. if you did that, would your will be consistent? And that's really the test. The test is, are you going to, by doing that, undermine your own willing? So here's an easy case, or an apparently easy case. Think of the case of cheating at cards. So you say, well, you know, when I play cards, I like to win. And you know how I ensure I win? I cheat. Right? That's how my will operates when I'm playing cards. And then Kant says, well, when you do that, Frank, by magic, so to speak, that's what everyone else does too. Why? Well, because that's what it is to treat that as a reason. It's to make it a reason for everyone. So now, everyone will cheat when they play cards, because everybody wants to win when they play, right? Okay, so would you notice now that your will has become self-refuting? Why? Well, because if that becomes part of everyone's will, nobody will play cards. That's the thought. So the very motive, the very goal you set up for yourself, right, the very thing you plan to do, will self-defeat. So the test is, right, a motivational consistency test. Kant's thought is, you're just as when you draw a conclusion in theoretical logic, when you conclude that if P is true and P ROQ, if P implies Q is true, then Q is true. When you think, when I've got P and I've got P implies Q, I have a reason to conclude Q. That's only true if everyone has that reason to conclude Q. And suppose you decide, you know, hell, I'm just not going to conclude Q. Right? I'm going to conclude not Q. Right? What happens? Well, my theoretical reasoning becomes inconsistent. Right? I will now, in fact, have, if I operated, if that was my principle of rational operation, I would always conclude falsehoods from truths. And that's just what it is to be theoretically irrational, right? Or to not work properly. So you have to think, it's weird, but you see where on the story we told, Kant has nowhere else to go. He doesn't want to be a eudaemonist, because he thinks that will involve him in a kind of claim that ethics applies only to certain kinds of people. He wants moral reasons to apply to everyone. Plato and Aristotle have moral reasons that are elitist on Kant's view, right? They really only apply to the philosopher kings in the Republic or to the people of practical reason in the Nicomachean Ethics, with practical wisdom. Why? Well, because only they are sensitive to or aware of the considerations that make those moral things reasons, right? Intrinsic reasons to do things, right? Everyone else does them simply because they're afraid of being punished or out for the rewards. They're like the people in the Gospel of Matthew. In order to be like Job, right, you've got to be able to see the intrinsic value of not lying. And Kant says, well, only a few people in Plato and Aristotle can see the intrinsic value of not lying. But we expect everyone not to lie, and not just not to lie when it's not convenient. We expect them to never lie, period. That's it. How are we to get that to be a not-elitist consideration? And Kant says, well, it can only be if it's very simple, right? So that his thought is, it's just like, right, being able to do fairly simple arithmetic, right, or fairly simple logic. You don't have to take a logic course to do it, right? It's part of what it is for you to be reasonable, that you already have this little bit of machinery, so all you're doing is applying a consistency. So that's how Kant escapes the moral elitism charge, right? It's by these kinds of thought. Now, what I want to do today, and I may talk about Kant all this week, I don't know, see how much I do today. I will definitely change to Nietzsche next week. So here's the worry, right? If you understand the test, that's one thing, that's great. That's the categorical imperative. It says, act on. What? It's like, follow this principle, in your moral reasoning or your practical reasoning. That is, only put things in your motivational set that instantly, by your putting them there, go into everybody's. Bhagavad says, and you have the moral compass that will guide you towards the moral truth. That's it. So it's non-elitist kind of, it applies to everyone. You don't have to have special training. You don't need to be a philosopher ruler. You don't need to have special sort of ethical tastes. That applies to everyone. And let's suppose we understand them. I mean, that's as close as I can get to explaining them. Let's suppose we understand them. We see what Kant is after. He thinks that merely by focusing on what a moral reason is, he can get you to this position. And now what I want to do is, and this has been a huge issue in Kant scholarship, is, well, what then doesn't go into your motivational set? What fails the test? Or another way to look at it is, what passes the test? So this is the test. What do we get if we apply it? And Kant, first of all, notice that the test has got to be easy, because he wants to avoid elitism. So this is an easy test. So no elitism. And it's a morally credible test. That is, it gives intuitively acceptable results. Right? So, I mean, obviously it's hopeless if it doesn't give reasonably intuitive results. We might have Thrasymacheian worries here, and you'll see that Nietzsche is going to have some of those. But intuitively, if it tells you that killing innocent babies is okay, but incarcerating child molesters or murderers is not okay, you think, well, come on, that's hopeless, right? Or if it tells you things like, look, you can never lie, you might think, gee, I'd need to get a lot of proof to think that, because it just seems obvious that in some circumstances I'm morally required to lie. It's not just that it's okay. I would be a failure as a moral agent if I didn't lie. If I didn't save my poor Jewish grandmother up in the attic when the Nazi thugs come to beat her to death with clubs, it doesn't sound like I'd be able to say, you know, what a good person I am, right? Well, it sounds like I'd be stupid, right? And that seems right. So we're going to look at the morally credible and the easy. We're going to look at both of these tests now and see. Yeah?
Could you speak a little bit more to the Parasimian concerns?
Say again?
Can you speak a little bit more to the Parasimic concerns about this? That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, well, I can't. I can, but I won't now, if you don't mind. I'll wait till you see how Nietzsche does it.
Okay.
Because there are, of course, a lot of things you could ask. So whose moral intuitions, right? And how have they been constructed, and are they subject to ideological contamination? And so what I've made is, I've made a kind of easy, relatively straightforward or easy test in the sense that nothing could count on anybody's account of morality if it included these things as moral and excluded those. So I try to make it a very easy to, uncontroversial test. Right? So let's hold it uncontroversial. We won't look at any trade cases. We'll just look at very simple cases and see what happens. So I want to look at this test first, and then look at an obvious problem. So let's look at the morally credible test. And so the first thing I'm going to argue is that everything passes. Everything can be made to pass the test. So the test is vacuous. Now this is a fairly easy first step, and then you'll see that there's a little complication, and then we'll look at some other cases. Okay, so I'm going to say the morally credible. The first criticism is going to be everything passes, or everything can be made to pass. And here's the way you do it. So suppose you're considering cheating at cards. We'll take the very simple case where it looks like Kant might be onto something, right? That you would be undercutting the whole business of card playing if everybody cheated. And you can sort of think that would be true too with promising, maybe. If you knew that everyone would break their promises, that would be like everybody would issue bum checks, so nobody would take a check, nobody would accept a promise, right? Because everybody knows that. Notice, not that you might, but that you necessarily will. It is part of your motivational set. You're bound to lie. You're bound to break your promises. You're bound to, who would bother promising? Will you promise? Oh, what difference does that make, right? I know you're going to break it, so, okay. So there it looks pretty good. So here's the way to, this is what we call, how to, can be made to pass. This is called maxim tweaking. I call it that. Maxim tweaking. So you look at your maxim, right? So what am I putting in my motivational set? Well, if I put in this, let everyone who wants to win at cards cheat, my will becomes inconsistent. Because I'm clever, so I think, well, I'm not going to put that in. Let me put this one in instead. Let everyone identical to me cheat. Now we're talking, right? Because notice, how are you going to put that into your motivation? There's an interesting question. Should you put, let everyone identical, so suppose you're Mary and you're doing, let everyone identical to Mary, well, then it'll just go back to everyone, right? But if I say, no, I mean, let everyone identical to me, David, right? So when you put it in your motivational set, you put in, let everyone identical to David. Cheat. Well, now, who cheats? David does. Who else? Not according to this, nobody. So now I'm back in the cheating business, right? And I can do that with every single maxim. I just put, let everyone identical to me. Fine. So this is the first one. Let everyone whatever phi is, whatever consideration, whatever it was, cheat, lie, steal, murder, right? I just put that in. And although you might think, well, gee, that sounds kind of cheap. It is. That's the nice thing about it. That's very simple. But notice that Kant is relying on notions of order, logical structure, and reason that are formal. And so it's not clear on formal grounds how he can object to it. That's right. That's not. There's nothing logically the matter with it. So what's wrong with acting on a principle like that? Now, a reason to bring it up, however, is to notice that there is a response to it. So notice that maxim tweaking, that's an action. And so there's a maxim related to it. So what is the maxim related to your maxim tweaking? It's this, right? When you can tweak your maxim so that you can do what you want to do, even though you wouldn't be happy to have, or you wouldn't will that everyone else tweak their maxims this way, then, so what I'm doing when I do that is I'm issuing you a license to tweak your maxim. When I say, I'm going to tweak my maxim so that I can get away with whatever I want, I'm saying, and that's what all of you will do. So you can jack up the categorical imperative to every level of maxim formation. So it's not just the first order maxims that apply to actions, but it's also the second order ones that apply to, I don't know, I never know what clothes to put on this season. I'm always either too hot or too cold. It's partly because of the damn heat on these damn buildings. Okay, so they're obviously not Kantians, so because I'm the thing. Okay, so you see the issue, right? right? You see that you don't want to allow or permit or issue a blank check. Tweak your maxim any old which way you want so that you can get what you want, because that would just undercut the whole business. And Kant does have the resources to do something about that, because he can say, no, this checks. So that point is a very simple one, but it's not often properly made. And when you see it, you see that actually there's reasons operate at every level, right? You can have reasons to form a certain maxim, just you can have a reason to form an intention, right? And in forming an intention, I'm going to form an intention now that in 10 years' time I'll leave my children half my estate. That's a plan I make now for what I will do later, and it's an action, right? I'm acting, I'm doing something, making an intention, forming a plan. And I can have an intention to form an intention. Tomorrow I'm going to form an intention about, I'm going to make a plan about what to do about my children, right? Right, I can keep iterating those kind of things. So the categorical imperative can come in at every level. Okay, so that's the first worry, right? Yes?
What's wrong with saying, let everyone identical to me tweak maxims?
Same problem. Then it pops up a level. Will I be happy to have everyone form that
So
plan?
can you just like keep saying?
You can keep, yeah, but notice it doesn't work because it keeps being trumped at the next level up. So you can't stop the thing where you want it. You want it to stop here, and then we get going. But actually the test says you can't put that in your will, because look, it fails the test. So, but nonetheless, it's very important to recognize that just what a maxim is and how you formulate it has now become a major issue. And in fact, though we're not going to go through the tedious rigmarole of all of the different kinds of examples and counterexamples that come up, because frankly they bore the ass off you to look at them. Once you get the picture, the details become less important. You can sort of think about how to do it. But that's been a big issue. How do you make maxims, immune to this kind of tweaking, right? So people say, you can't put any indexicals or proper names in them. All the terms have to be general. And then there are a million ways around those. You can just come up with, general descriptions that only have one instance. And then you have to, that's tedious. And obviously, in a sense, this is what happens when you start certain kinds of philosophical machines. They look very promising at the beginning, but after you run them for about 2 days, you realize that something must be wrong back at the beginning, because look what you're talking about now, right? This nonsense, when what you were hoping to do was something of moral import. By the way, notice this is supposed to be an easy test. So the more complicated you make it to get out of the counterexamples, the more you're caught on the easiness problem. So if it takes a rocket scientist to figure out whether the maxim is okay or not, then you've got moral elitism back in again, because only rocket scientists can figure out what their will is. Right? So those are a pincer movement, right? One says you're going to have to make it complicated, and the other says you're going to have to make it simple, and those two run in. So leave those kinds of considerations aside, though, and then just look at some of Kant's examples. So Kant thinks that he gives us some examples that are supposed to make it intuitive to us that the categorical imperative is a good test. And he gives the formulation we're looking at as the basic one. He gives a number of other formulations, like respecting the rational agency of others, who treat others as ends and never as means, or so he gives the universal, this sort of respect kind of notion. But he says they're all the same. So they all come down to the same. And you can see kind of what he means. So when I give you a reason that you would, as a rational being, accept, I treat you as a rational being. When I lie to you, I don't do that. Because if you knew what I was doing, you wouldn't accept it. Right? That's the sort of notion of respect. So he's kind of milking the notion of this, the categorical imperative to get out of a moral content like respect for others, right? Because the thought is, when I lie to you, I don't treat you as an end in yourself. I treat you as a means to an end. Why? Well, because if you knew my maxim, you wouldn't believe me. So there's a kind of notion like that of, can I make myself transparent to you and still, do what I'm doing? And there's some very attractive, pieces of it. If only it was all coming from this machinery. So sometimes what happens is, so Kant wants to pull in things that we're already fond of, and then say, I can get those from my categorical imperative, and the question is, can he? So let's look at some examples. So never lie. Never commit suicide. And these are Kant's own examples. And the trouble with them, of course, is that you might think that already you don't believe either of them. Right, that's a problem. Kant does believe them, but and then he thinks, so look, I can make my categorical imperative explain these things. Whereas for us, you might think, no, those are really bad examples. Right? Really bad, because we think of each of those things as, well, applicable only in certain circumstances. Right? We don't think, oh, you should never kill yourself. I mean, so just think of a little scenario like this. You've been captured. You're a member of the French resistance. You know the names of all the people in your group. You've been captured by the nasty Nazis. They've got you in the torture chamber. You see the instruments of torture. You realize that you'll probably break. Maybe not right away, but you're not confident that you won't. And you've got a poison pill. You take it because you don't want to betray your comrades. We don't think, what an immoral person. I mean, man, didn't he read Kant? Right, we don't think that, right? In fact, we think, what a hero. He died for his comrades. Rather than find himself betraying them, he killed himself. So admire him. We don't blame him. And then what about the cat? Well, it's the obvious again, the Jewish grandmother in the attic. And I don't know why we're always dealing with Nazis, but it's probably just because we think they really are bad. But we're getting a lot more of them around these days, so maybe we'll have to change our tune after a while, otherwise they'll come and kill us. No, I like Nazis. Yeah. Again, it just seems obvious that the person who lies to a maniac, I mean, just suppose, for example, you see the guy down in Texas or wherever it was, who's coming into the church with his automatic rifle, and you can stop him by lying to him. Just imagine afterwards, seeing he's killed 27 people or whatever, and the sheriff says, he told you what he's going to do? And he said, well, it was pretty obvious. I mean, he was loading the gun, and he had that kind of murderous look about him, and so forth. And he said, how do you get into that church anyway? Right? Which door is open? And I said, well, it's the front door. And the sheriff said, geez, why didn't you lie to him? He said, have you read the fundamental groundwork of the metaphysics of morals? I don't think anybody is going to be massively impressed with your moral acuity, right? They're going to think you're crazy, right? And so on both of these examples, right, which are Kant's, I think we would think, well, first, they're bad examples because it's not clear we want them to pass our moral test. Now, the next one would be, do they really fail the categorical imperative? And that's, I'm going to leave as homework. But just think of the case of never commit suicide. So I think if you're in circumstances in which by staying alive, you might commit a greater moral crime than if you kill yourself. That's the case of the person avoiding giving up, betraying their comrades, then you should. Really, does it seem to you that you shouldn't put that in everyone's motivational set? It seems to me that I'd be quite happy to have everyone have that in their motivational. So I don't think the will is inconsistent. Right? I'm not saying commit suicide whenever you feel like it. I'm saying when what's at stake is more valuable than your life, right? Which is in this case. And of course, it could just be that you're faced with unbearable, excruciating pain from an illness, and there's no cure and no way to handle the pain. You might think it's just that's not being alive, that's being misery, I'm going to kill myself. Again, I think we might think, oh, we'll be happy to have everyone act on that. You know, so if you have assisted suicide laws, as they do in Oregon, for example, you know what, you can't just go kill yourself, but you get counseling, you get so and so, and in some cases everybody agrees. Yeah. You're faced with what you're faced with, I'd kill myself too. So to say, we're gonna stop you from killing yourself, doesn't sound like kindness or higher moral. It sounds like cruelty. No, I'm gonna make you suffer, right? Yeah.
So, does Kant in the categorical imperative like assume that when he says all rational beings, does he assume every situation as well, like all rational beings?
Well, that's right. So you can think of it this way. When I put it in everyone, so when I say, you know, whenever you want to win at cards, cheat, right? It's not everyone will be motivated, will be moved by that, because not everybody will be playing cards. Not everyone may want to win at cards. But the point is, it's in every rational agent's motivational set. So whenever you find yourself in circumstances in which the maximum applies, then you will do it. Yeah. So let's go back a second. So why would Kant think that either of these were good examples? And he thinks they're very good examples, and that they pass the categorical imperative. And I've given you a reason to think in the suicide case that they don't pass the categorical imperative. I've given you reason to think that a reasonable view on suicide would have that pass the categorical imperative test. So in other words, it would be fine. It doesn't seem to be inconsistent to will it. But here's what Kant is thinking. Kant is thinking Christianly. He thinks your life is a gift from God, and you mustn't give it back. It's not under God. He's the master. He decides whether you stay alive or not. So you put that into the fact, into the thing, then it becomes more reasonable to believe it. But of course, now it's not morality, it's Christian morality. You have to have a specific view about your life, which doesn't seem you have to have in order to be a rational agent, right? I mean, Muslims are rational agents too, at least some of them. And right, there's no reason for them to argue this way or pick a different one where there's no. I assume that agnostics or atheists can be rational agents. There's nothing irrational about being rational. You might not be believing the truth, but that's not irrational if the evidence you've got is not adequate to get you to believe it. Right? So, and I think the same probably holds with lie. He's thinking of Christian views about this, which is that lying is an offense to God in some way, and that's why you mustn't do it. So with those special background views, you might get these things to do some work. By the way, Plato in the Phaedo holds a very similar view. It's a very important issue, is why shouldn't you kill yourself? In a whole lot of especially if, so let me give the obvious problem. Both Plato and Christians believe that this life is a testing ground for the next life. That's where the fun begins, or the horrors begin, depending on where you're going, right? But this is just a testing, right? It's a tiny little bit of an eternal life. So here's an obvious thought. Well, I should if you're a Catholic, for example, I should go to confession, so make sure I've committed no sins, and I'm copacetic, everything is good. And then I just tell myself, well, I'm nice and clean, and then I go right to heaven. So that sounds like a perfectly rational thing to do. I mean, if I really believe that, let's get out of the test and into the fun. Yes. And then you hear, no, God doesn't like you to short-circuit the process that way. That's a new sin, and you won't get in. And Plato has a very similar view. We never get the truth while we're in body because our reason is all mixed up with our bodies in the Phaedo, all mixed up with our body. And then I thought, well, why don't we just get rid of our body and go, then we'll get the truth right away. And Plato says, your life is a gift, you can't give it back. And you think, look, I don't know about you, maybe I'm just weird about this, but I do give gifts back. I mean, not casually. And I don't just say, no, I don't want to. That would be probably rude and unpleasant, right? But I don't think that because I've been given a gift, there's always a massive obligation to accept it. I might think, no, it's too much. Or I might think this, you're trying to buy me and I don't want to be bought, so, oh, it's very sweet of you to want to give me this, but it's too much, I can't accept it. Right? So, and anyway, notice this one. You can't, it's not like this, you can't turn down the gift of life. You can't say, excuse me, God, but look, I know you're going to give me that gift of life, but I know that if I get it, I can't give it back no matter how horrible the circumstances are, so would you mind not giving it to me? This is the famous rabbi joke, right? Best of all is not to be born, and the rabbi says, how many are so lucky? It's a great line, right? You've got to be born to be there, to be the thing. So you've already gotten the gift before you're in a position to say, I don't want it. Okay, so the question is, well, can we come up with credible examples of morally non-controversial things that the categorical imperative tells us are morally non-controversial, or morally controversial things that the categorical imperative tells us are controversial? So can we find data to support the categorical imperative? So we looked at two cases, and it was very hard to find them. And so that's the problem that Kantians have faced. For various reasons, they've found themselves wanting to cling to the don't lie case and spend a lot of time trying to defend it. And I just think it's silly in a way, right? It's silly. It's never going to really have the traction. And we'll see why in a minute. Right? So think about it this way. You know, when I think about doing arithmetic or logic, there's a pretty compelling reason for me to adopt the norms of those subjects. Why? Well, because not to adopt them is to fail to achieve the ends that are part of them. So I want to get to true conclusions. I won't if I disobey the laws of logic. I want to balance my checkbook. I won't if I don't follow the laws of arithmetic. Right? Right? And I said, fine, that's a good reason to follow those laws, right? Because I want what they bring me about. They bring about. Now, I won't achieve it if I don't. It's foolish to be inconsistent, right? But there'll be a real question of whether or not that carries over to this. So really the thought would be, in order for me to, suppose it's true that the categorical imperative does tell me never lie. Let's imagine that's so. So you should never lie. Right? If you put I lie in certain circumstances into your motivation so it's inconsistent, I think the next question is to ask, why shouldn't I be inconsistent sometimes? And that's not a simple question to answer. So remember, a foolish inconsistency is the hobgoblin of small minds, is roughly to say, don't get so bound up with this consistency stuff. And we'll come back to that. So that is, right, in order to move a big moral boulder with a lever, you need a very strong fulcrum. Right? The lever is only good as the fulcrum. It's the lever. You can put it again. The lever has to be strong, and the fulcrum has to be permanent. Right? I want to move this big thing. I'm trying to persuade you that you should never lie. And I know that it's an uphill battle, so I've got this big metal bar, and I'm pushing, and the bar breaks. The bar has to be stronger than your thoughts about the lying. And that's a tall order. It's got to give you reason to change very strong moral views. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have a very strong moral view that I should lie to save my grandmother. And I've got a very strong moral view that I should commit suicide to save, right, something vastly more valuable. I don't die. Hundreds of really good people will die. It just seems like I should, right? No, I need to be convinced that I'm wrong. Well, that's going to take a lot of work, right? What would have the strength and so on, commitment value to make me change my mind? So here's first we can give a cheap way of saying it's a useless test because everything can be made to pass it. We've got a thought about maybe how Kant could respond. That isn't to say that we see that it'll work, just that we've got a thought about it. And then we've got some failures to find any things that go in our motivational set that are definitely moral and go in, right? And that's because they pass the categorical imperative, right? Because when we look at Kant's examples, they don't seem very good. Now let's look at a different problem altogether, and then we'll see how the two sort of fit together. Now let's move over to the easiness of the test. Now, I'm going to give a very simple example, and you'll see instantly how complicated things become. So I'll start with a very simple test. So I need to go to the bathroom, and there's a river handy, and I think, I'll just pee in the river. Right? It's a big river, and I don't pee that much. Right? So I think, I'll just pee in the river. Right? Now, that's fine, no problem, until another factor enters in, which is this. Right? If everyone does that, there will be a serious problem with the river. Right? So if everyone throws their garbage and their sewage into the river, that's a disaster. But if only I do it, it's not a disaster. But notice that in this case, I've got to have a sense of not just this, what goes in your motivational set. I've got to have a sense of actually how many of you there are, and whether or not you live near the river, and whether or not if you do, this will be the most convenient way of you to get there. I need to seem to know a bunch of facts about things before I can decide this question, right? It's not just, in other words, that you're rational. It's about, so suppose, for example, I think, well, you know, I'm in Alaska, and I think there are about 4 other people in Alaska. All right, maybe I've looked at the demographics of Alaska, right? And I think, yeah, there's me, and right, and I think there are about 3 others, right? That's it. Nobody else is in Alaska. Well, now, peeing in the river is just not a problem, right? I mean, it's not as if all the rational, it's not I can argue like this. If every rational agent was in Alaska and they all wanted to pee in the river and they all did, why should I act according to that when I know that there are only 3 people in Alaska? That sounds stupid, right? It's like I'm giving weight to something that just doesn't apply. So notice there's an oath. You often hear this. Well, I ran into it in the bookstore. So I wanted to buy an iPad, and in order to get it, I had to have my ID, my my one card or whatever it's called. And I never carry it because I leave it in my car because I use it to get into the parking garage, and if I have it in my wallet, I have to get it out, and it's a pain. So I leave it, and I said, well, I don't have it, it's in the car. And the person in the store said, well, I'm sorry, I can't give you the thing. And I said, well, that's ridiculous, I got my PID, you can just look me up on the computer. I mean, here I am, and there'll be a photograph, not as good as this, right there. And you can just look at it. She said, no, then I'd have to do that for everyone. And I said, that's a ridiculous reason. And she said, well, no, I've taken an ethics course. And I said, yeah, and I teach ethics courses, okay, and I'm telling you, that's a really stupid reason, all right? So just give me the damn computer, right? So, and she said, no, and I said, okay, then I want to see your, so I was damned if I was going to walk back to the parking lot and get my damn card for this stupid reason, right? Why is it that? Notice it's this, right? So think about it. Imagine that people are going to build a bridge over a river. And so the downtown area is on one side of the river, and then the huge suburbs on the other side of the river. And they say, well, how big should we make the bridge? And one guy says, what if everybody decides to go downtown at the same time? Oh, we need a really big bridge. Right? And I was like, but they won't. Why? Well, because when I drive out to the end of my road and I see wall-to-wall cars getting onto the bridge, I'm not going to join them. right? There's a self-regulating side to our reasoning, which says, well, of course not everybody is going to do this. You know, how many people are not going to have their PID cards? Well, probably hardly any, or maybe 2 or 3. And that's going to be such a big deal to look them up if they've got their number? Come on, give me a break. That's ridiculous. And same argument. What if everybody did it? Is never a particularly good reason. Why? Well, because, right, the question you set response is, but everybody won't. And why? Well, because when A sees that B is, they won't do it, right? So think about it in all these cases. A child is drowning. Should you jump in to save it? 98 people have jumped in already. Oh, maybe I should jump in too. Oh, come on. You're going to drown each other and probably they lose the child. And everybody's going to be, I want to drown, I want to save it. No, get out of the way. I wasn't even first. Right? What happens, 100 people and the child all drown, right? So we're not stupid beings, right? At least most of us are not. We adopt our, if you like, our maxims change as we notice new facts about what it is we should do. And then we try to plug all that into how you should form your maxims. It gets awfully complicated as to tell you what you should do. So it's not an easy test. Now it's in the sense that there are factors that can make it an extremely complicated, things you have to know, right? And whether or not you know them has an effect on what maxims you form. And some of those can be very hard to know. They needn't be easy to know. They can be very hard. Let me give an obvious example. You just don't know what the laws of nature are. You just don't. You don't know any physics. After all, who knows any physics? Hardly anyone, right? So you don't know any physics, especially not outre physics. But actually, if you did know outre physics, you wouldn't do those. So let me give an obvious example. You burn carbon fuels, and you don't see anything wrong with it. Everybody does it. And you have no idea that there's any harm involved in doing it because you don't know that it will affect the ozone layer. You don't even know there is an ozone layer, and you don't know why the ozone layer is important. Right? You don't know that what happens if the ozone layer gets holes in it is that we all start getting skin cancer and all kinds of other things because of the effects of the ozone layer blocks out the harmful rays of the sun. And it destroys crops and all kinds of other things. So it's a big deal. Right? You don't know that. So if you don't know it, what's to stop you forming a maxim that had you known the laws of physics, you wouldn't form? So one of the things of the difference between logic and ethics is that ethics seems to rely or need to know a whole lot of facts that are relevant, whereas in physics and in mathematics and logic, it seems like they're just formal. They're not about, it's not like this. You need to know what happens if P implies Q, and Q, you need to know a whole lot of facts before you get Q. That's the beauty of logic, but it's also what makes it seem not very like ethics. Right? In ethics, it seems that you do need to know a whole lot of things. So for example, it's your birthday. Should I give you chocolate? Shall I give you candy as a birthday present? Well, a number of things I might need to know. One, do you have any food allergies? Oh, maybe I don't know that. Right? Do I know what the effects of eating a lot of sugar are? Am I trying to do something good for you, or am I just going through motions? Is everybody else going to give you candy? Right? There's a whole lot of things it seems I need to know before I can sort of say whether I should put something in my maxim. In other words, the inconsistency test, just logical inconsistency, seems way too weak. Right? Because it leaves out all kinds of knowledge of empirical facts that if I had them would have a very big effect on what I would put in my. And so you go to the restaurant, there's all kinds of stuff on the menu. You have no idea what's good for you, what isn't, what the effects are, what they aren't. You just think, oh, the hamburger looks good, I think I'll have that. And that's, after all, how most of us make our choices in a whole lot of areas. We've gotten much better. Now we can click on our little iPhone and say, no, don't have the hamburger. Look what happens when you eat that stuff, man. We might, but if we didn't know that, right, we would put the maximum, let anybody who wants to eat a hamburger, we might not have any knowledge whatsoever about what it costs the planet and people in other countries to produce the meat that goes into hamburgers. The more knowledge we have, the more restrictive our motivational set becomes, or should become. But it's not because of formal considerations. It's not because it would be inconsistent, right? It's that when we know the facts, certain kinds of things become consistent. So we might think that it's, yes, go ahead.
Does his idea of intention remedy that at all?
I don't think so, because what intentions I form are also sensitive to, are also depend on what the facts are, right? So when I form a plan, a good plan is not just a consistent plan. That's a very minimal constraint on it, that it shouldn't be, like, it shouldn't be this. Give the dog her dinner and don't give the dog her dinner. That's a hopeless plan, right? That's just inconsistent, right? But now consider, what should I give the dog for dinner? Now the thing is not just about consistency, it's about what's good. So, oh no, don't give the dog any cheese, for God's sake. You know, she's lactose intolerant, so die, right? Or think of a whole lot of others that are just like that. Right? So you probably saw the story about the kid who gave her friend a cheese sandwich and died because it was lactose, some kind of allergic reaction. So, you know, you need to know some facts before you form plans, and in fact, good plans are very sensitive to local factual considerations and information.
I meant with respect to like the determinism. I meant with respect to like determinism.
Well, even that, yeah, but even then, right? Even if you were free to form your intention, Kant is giving you a test of which intentions you should freely form, right? And then the facts come back in again. So we can think that on the easy test, no elitism, is that the categorical imperative, you know what that is, the categorical imperative is elitist. In fact, we might think that it's more elitist than the case with Plato and Aristotle. Why? Well, because Plato and Aristotle tell us how to have a character, how to have a motivational self that makes us sensitive to the intrinsic value of things. It doesn't tell us, right, what all those things are. It says, you'll be a good moral agent if you're sensitive to the intrinsic, to morally or ethically intrinsic features of things. But it doesn't say anything about what intentions you should form, considering different kinds of facts. That's going to be true, but the point about you is you'll be a good person when into the balance goes the intrinsic weight of the values. That's quite different from thinking, I don't even know what to do yet. I don't even have the intrinsically valuable thing yet, because I don't know yet whether my maxim will pass the test. You see with me? So here's the Kant is telling you, find out whether this is morally valuable or not. Run the test. So I don't know yet what I should, how I should feel about this thing, or what I should think about it until I run the test. Plato and Aristotle say, if you're in this cognitive and emotional and so on state, you'll be sensitive to the intrinsic value of things. But the intrinsic values can compete, and they can be outweighed by extrinsic factors, right? That's not the issue. The question is simply, do you see the intrinsic value of acting on moral grounds? Not, what will you then do? That's a different question, right? And that might be very difficult, but the morally good agent is at least aware of the intrinsic value of things. Kant is trying to tell you how to get to the intrinsic value, right? Not how to respond to it when it's already there. Yeah.
So if
Kant wants to run this test, and what he's saying is that what really motivates you to act morally is the recognition of the fact that this action is moral. But doesn't it go against some intuition? Doesn't it fall into a kind of moral fetishism that, like, I would only act in such way because it is moral, not like as a lot of other philosopher reports that I would act this way because I see that it is good to act this way because I'm just attracted to acting this way.
Well, so here's a way to put what you said. For Kant, moral value is monolithic value. It's not nuanced. It's simply one kind of value. What kind of value is it? Well, it's the value that's captured by this. It's that formal kind of value. And then you can indeed ask, but why is that kind of value so important? Right, so that's the next sort of worry to have is, remember I said, okay, so it's a fulcrum and the lever. I've got the moral value that this captures, supposing that it does capture a moral value, has to be sufficiently compelling that it can outweigh other practical considerations. So this is the claim right, so let's see if we can do this now. So we've got the easiness of the test worry, we've got the moral credibility of the test worry. Now we've got another question, which is the authority. This is the categorical imperative. Well, the authority of the categorical imperative. And this is the question: is moral value so conceived, that is, as passing the categorical imperative, as a overriding? Right. So let me give the example. So morality on Kant's view as not only moral value as a distinctive kind of value that's captured this way, but it's also more valuable than any other kind of value. So this is where the fetishism side comes in, where you think, it's the most valuable kind of value. And that means that if there's competition between what morality requires of you and what, say, prudence requires of you, morality always wins. So no prudential considerations can ever outweigh moral considerations. It's always the other way around. And that, some people think that it's definitive of moral reasons that they be overriding. That is, moral authority is absolute. So you find that right away in the ethics. The only good thing is a good will. That's the only kind of absolute kind of value. And so having a good will is the most valuable kind of thing to have. It trumps all other values. And so we might ask, so this is our first consideration, this is our second, now we're on our third. And here, let me give an example. So I have so someone who holds the overridingness of moral reasons as definitive of moral reasons is a Welsh philosopher, D.C. Phillips. And Phillips came when I was an undergraduate. When I was an undergraduate, Phillips came to give a talk, and he argued that moral value is always overriding. And I had a question. The question turned out he didn't have an answer, so I'm going to give it to you again to see what you think of it. So it's a very simple case. So I have a very demanding mother, and I've been a dutiful son. I'm getting towards my 50s now. My mother's old, but she is always calling me and demanding that I do something. Come over, do something, get me this, do that. And actually, I realized that I've pretty much, my marriage failed because my mother was so intrusive. I just don't have, she's always sort of asking me to do something. And I'm beginning to think that maybe I've been too responsive. So comes to be Friday night. I've got a date with a woman that I met at work. I really like her, and I'm hoping that something is going to come of it. I've made the date, and we're all set up, my mother friends. And she says, I'm not feeling well, could you come over? And you think, no, she's fine, it's always the same story, right? There's never anything the matter with her, she just wants to exert her control and have my company. And, this time I'm going to say no. I'm just going to think, no, I've done it enough, I'll come tomorrow. And so this is a prudential consideration, right? You want to go on the date, you want to have a life, you're hoping that new romance will start, something as good is going to happen. And there's your demanding mother again, and going to interrupt her for something that you think, yeah, I have that duty, so that's the representative of the moral duty. But it seems that prudential considerations can overweigh that. Of course, not all the time, but my goodness, if there's ever a case, it sounds like this, the kind of one where you really need to be a little more prudent and a little less moral. You're giving Judy too much weight in your life because there's someone who's making an unrealistic moral demand on you. By the way, unrealistic moral demands are part and parcel of, say, utilitarianism and Kantianism. I'll just sketch it roughly. When moral reasons have to be reasonably demanding reasons, if they become outrageously demanding reasons, that is, you ruin your life if you follow these reasons, then it becomes incredible that moral value is as valuable as it is. Right? So take the obvious one. So utilitarianism is the best one. It says you must always act so as to maximize the pleasure minus pain, or the happiness or utility of all other agents. Well, suppose you're thinking, I think tonight I'm going to read a novel. Is that really the action that's going to maximize so you have to do a big calculation. Notice that it's not even clear how you would do it. But it's pretty obvious that probably reading the novel is not the one that will maximize the utility of others. Maybe you should go down and work at the homeless shelter. Maybe you should start writing checks to charities. Maybe you should do 1,000,001 other things. But the point is, if you think about it for a while, whenever you form a project, like you think, I'm going to become a really good pianist, you have to ask, well, is the commitment of time I'm going to make to that the biggest commitment, the best commitment I can make to everybody else's happiness? And the answer is almost going to be always no for everything. And that means that after a while, right, you lose the sense of yourself as an agent or somebody who's got any kind of life at all. So it seems way too demanding. So we don't have to go there. We can just see that in Kant, if I said, look, it does pass the test, never lie. It does pass the test, never commit suicide. It does pass the test, never kill. It does pass these are things you must always do. You could think, how did they get that authority? I mean, look, just consider the examples we gave in the never lie and never commit suicide. Right? Here's a consideration. Maybe it's moral, maybe it's prudential. It's hard to tell when I think I'm worried about the fate of all of my comrades in the circle. I'm worried about what will happen if the resistance gets destroyed by the Nazis. I'm worried about a whole set of things. Some of them are prudential, some of them are moral, some of them are mixed. Right? And I'm told, no, it's absolute that you must tell the truth in that case, right? Or that you mustn't kill yourself in that case. I think you think, where's the weight coming to outweigh all these things? Where is that weight coming from? And it seems very hard to give an answer. It's not, this is the thought that you're just a moral fetishist. You just are assigning arbitrary immense weight to what you call moral considerations that just don't seem good things to have. So you might have thought would be, and it's going to be Nietzsche's about this, is so, oh, screw that stuff. I mean, what is it doing for us? I don't understand that, where that authority is coming from. And Nietzsche says, roughly, it's all coming from the vestiges of religious thinking. And when you sever it from those, it doesn't have any authority at all. It just sounds like nonsense. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't disagree with your view, but I find your example that, like, the being responsive to your mother thing kind of confusing, because it's not at all obvious. Why would we categorize your mom's demand on you a kind of moral duty? Because think of another case that you're...
Well, yeah, you're quite right. So Phillips accepted it, Alice. He said, yes, that's duty calling. So and it transcends prudence, right? And he accepts. So that's the problem in part, Alice. You first have to identify some things as moral considerations, moral reasons. Because otherwise, what am I supposed to be outweighing? So you have to tell me some things, right, that I'm supposed to assign absolute value to. So he took duty to parents, I think was one of his examples, as the kind of thing. What if you have a very demanding parent? And again, I think you can do it for everything. That's the problem. So pick any absolute moral value that you have. So notice, for example, some people think in this case justice is an obvious one. Right? Nothing can ever outweigh the demands of justice. And I think that, we just don't think that. We think sometimes that mercy should temper justice. That justice makes very harsh demands, but there are considerations that should make us weaken it or should allow us to have discretion. So when we, for example, when judges are required to have minimum mandatory sentencing for drug abuses, for example, so they're required, no matter what the circumstances, to on a second offense to give someone 10 years in prison. Any sensible person would think that that was just undermining the discretion of judges. Why? Well, because there could be all kinds of factors that a good judge and a merciful judge would bring into consideration to see that this is not doing any good, right? This is really harming. It's not doing more good, it's doing more harm. What we want is our moral reasoning to be maximally sensitive to all these considerations, not to just be blotting some out. And that's part of the problem with having an absolute value assigned to moral thing. It blocks other things out, right? It shouts them down. It says, it's moral. So